And the credit agency Experian Africa has released data showing a deterioration in the trends to household finances when compared to the prior year. It says this indicates that South African consumers remain under financial pressure ahead of the festive season. Experian's latest report shows that there's market appetite for credit, which actually remains very high as consumers look to credit to help bridge the gap in covering living expenses. Jaco van Jaarsveldt is head of commercial strategy and innovation at Experian Africa, and he joins us now. Jaco, thank you very much for your time. This should come as no surprise because consumers have been under a lot of financial strain, and by all accounts, it seems not only will it be a dark festive season with load shedding in the midst, but our pockets will be lighter this time around.
Oh, that's right, and thanks for having me. Yes, the cost of living pressures, the higher interest rates, all of that's culminating in the consumer feeling the financial pressure in different segments of the market. The pressures that consumers feel are caused by different factors, such as the top end of the market is more influenced by the higher interest rates, especially the segments that have access to secured lending products like home and vehicle loans. But for the first time in a number of quarters, we've actually seen the lower end of the market, the less affluent market, equally starting to show signs of distress when we look at the Experian default index, consumer default index, with the deteriorating at the less affluent segment of the market as well, which is a clear indicator that the inflationary pressures and the cost of living is starting to negatively impact on consumers across all spectrum of life.
What should be also very worrying is that between April and June this year, in that particular quarter, for the first time, as you've mentioned, we've seen that value of defaults actually rising to 19.2 billion rands in defaults. Where are consumers struggling the most? Is it their retail loans? Is it their retail accounts? Is it their cars, their home loans? Where does the data take us?
It's across all products, and I think what we need to look at is the pre- and post-COVID levels of consumer distress and the rate of first payment default is very different. So let's take retail. We've seen for the first time in many quarters that there's a deterioration in the consumer default index on retail loans, but we need to put it in context. If we go back to pre-COVID levels, we are at levels half the levels where they were pre-COVID. So the retail industry and the rate of first payment default in the retail industry, whilst increasing, is significantly lower than it was pre-COVID. And similarly, across the other products, the unsecured lending products are very much in line with the default rates pre-COVID, where the secured lending products are showing slight deterioration. So if we have to put our fingers on where is the biggest pressure felt, for the last 3-4 quarters, we could clearly see it's in the secured lending market, where the majority of people that fits into the affluent segments of the market are feeling pressure, and that's because of the interest rates. And in the retail space, it's starting to show a bit of distress, but just again to state, it's nowhere near it was pre-COVID levels. And the reason for that is the retailers during COVID weren't able to sell as the stores closed, and during the COVID times, they completely changed their lending criteria and became significantly more conservative. And what we've seen post-COVID is when the COVID rules were set aside, the demand for credit is actually stronger than it was pre-COVID. So we can clearly see from a demand side, consumers need the money and they are feeling the pressure. What we are seeing, though, from the supply side, especially in the unsecured market space, which is retail, credit cards, personal loans, the supply is nowhere near where it was pre-COVID. So the reluctance or the conservative lending profiles or lending criteria that unsecured lenders have in place is still to a certain extent protecting us from a significantly deteriorating consumer segment. And that's actually a good thing, in that if you go look at the debt to income ratios of the South African consumer, it's actually lower, significantly lower than it was pre-COVID as well. So there's room for consumers to take more credit. the credit being pushed into the market, even though we see the deterioration, is done in a very responsible, very conservative manner. And the one positive thing, if we look to the GDP numbers in future, even though we don't believe that the GDP growth will be any stronger than it, wouldn't be strong in the year to come, the consumer side will still remain relatively strong simply because of the very conservative lending criteria that was in place prior to during COVID, which allows for banks, retailers, credit providers to be slightly more risk-taking, but still consumers feel the pressure even though this credit provision is significantly lower than pre-COVID.
You've just said that there is a good record for South Africa when it comes to pushing the credit to consumers. But you also say, as Experian Africa, that now more than ever, consumers need to develop positive financial habits that will see them through these challenging financial times. What are those habits? And if you say that we should look to save more money, I will certainly look the other way, because you can't really save when you're in debt.
Correct. And I think the message is actually twofold. It is, think twice before you take on more credit. The rate of credit supply will become a bit more aggressive, so it'll be easier for consumers to get credit in future as the credit institutions start lending more because of the low base that they're coming from post-COVID. But that doesn't mean consumers should take it up. And number two, what's very important, what are you taking the credit for? And I understand fully that the cost of living pressures is a tough thing to deal with. If that credit is for something you don't need, don't take it. And that is the piece of advice that we would always give consumers out there. Think very carefully what you buy on credit and make use of other facilities that's not interest-bearing, like the buy now, pay later products, potential lay-by products, things like that doesn't incur credit interest and doesn't require you to pay it off over a long time and doesn't get you into debt very quickly. So be very responsible. And for those of the population that's fortunate enough to get a bonus or get a 13th check, use some of that money to settle debt, and the rest of it, use a small portion for the gifts, for the fun, for the holiday season. It is a difficult message to send, but it's always prudent to take a portion of that money and protect and build up a buffer for January, because January, February, March typically is the toughest time from a consumer credit perspective when the hangover from the festive season occurs. So our message is, don't let that hangover occur. Be very conservative and prudent in the way you use your money, and if you don't need it, don't buy it.
Jaco, briefly before I let you go, the debt counseling firm Debt Busters said in Q3, research shows that more than 30% of the debt counseling inquiries that they have received compared to last year have increased 30%, and more than ever, it's from first-time home buyers and first car buyers who actually looked to the opportunities of the lower interest rate that we had since 2020 and 2021. In Q3, according to your own research as well, it shows that the most affluent consumers remain under more financial strain, relatively speaking, than their less affluent counterparts in terms of luxury living. That has deteriorated when it comes to the CDI itself, the Consumer Default Index, to 16%.
That's correct. And there's a very strong correlation between what we've been observing over the last 4 quarters, specifically when the deterioration or the distress started exhibiting itself in the top end of the market, the luxury living market, the most affluent segment of the market. And that's typically the segment of the market that have access to secured lending products like vehicle loans and home loans. And we actually work closely with the team at Debt Busters. And when we overlay our numbers, we can clearly see that a leading indicator for the increase in debt counseling requests for first-time home buyers and vehicle buyers comes on the back of the strong supply and demand of credit into those segments about 9 to 12 months ago when interest rates were low. And the real unfortunate thing is that that population has never ever been exposed to an increasing interest rate cycle. They typically got exposed and bought houses at the bottom of the market when all the quantitative easing was taking place and interest rates were at very, very low levels. And one would think that a move in the prime rate from 6% to 11% isn't material. It might not be material for me that's been exposed to the 23% interest rates we experienced in 1998, and therefore the more mature market has been exposed to those interest rates, so we understand how to deal with it more. First-time buyers is very, very different. They've never been. A 5% interest rate increase over time for a first-time buyer, whether it's a home loan or a car, that's never been exposed to high interest rates and bought properties at 100% loan to value, it's a material increase, especially in the vehicle space where the term is significantly shorter than a home. So yes, we saw it starting to occur about 12 months ago. We started mentioning it when we saw the CDIX deteriorate in those segments. And as the gentleman, Benay at Deadbuster shares, it is very clear that that's now coming home to roost and the pressures on that segment of the market.
Jaco van Jaarsveldt at Experian Africa, thank you very much for your time.